Early settlers came to America to escape tyranny. With this being the case, the primary concern of the Founding Fathers was to prevent the rise of tyranny. Thus, the concept of separation of powers emerged, dividing the government into the legislative, judicial, and executive branches. These branches share operating duties and are forced to interact in order to govern, creating a system of checks and balances, which was designed so that no one branch of the government would become more powerful than the others. The legislative branch, which consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate, can make legislation, has the power of the purse, funding decisions, as well as the power to impeach the president. The executive branch is composed of the vice president, cabinet members and their respective departments, and is headed by the president. The president can veto legislation and propose laws, write treaties, make agreements and executive orders, as well as nominate Supreme Court judges. The judicial branch, which consists of the Supreme Court and other federal courts, can declare legislation and the president's actions as unconstitutional. In the late 1960s, with the United States embroiled in a long, costly war in Vietnam, youth voting rights activists held marches and demonstrations to draw lawmakers' attention to the hypocrisy of drafting young men and women who lacked the right to vote. In 1969, no fewer than 60 resolutions were introduced in Congress to lower the voting age, but none resulted in any action. During World War II, President Roosevelt lowered the drafting age to 18, whereas the voting age remained at 21. Old enough to fight, old enough to vote became a common slogan for a youth voting rights movement. And in 1943, Georgia became the first state to lower its voting age in state and local elections. Jennings Randolph, a Democratic congressman, introduced in 1942 the first of 11 bills to lower the voting age in federal elections. A few years later, President Eisenhower became the first president to publicly voice his support for a constitutional amendment to lower the voting age. To see how our three-branch government works, let's view a card game illustration depicting the enactment of the 26th Amendment.
In June of 1970, Congress extended the 1965 Voting Rights Act by including 18-year-olds by passing 3 amendments. The bill was passed by the House and the Senate.
Though he signed the bill into law, President Richard M. Nixon issued a public statement declaring that he believed the provisions to be unconstitutional.
In the 1970 case, Oregon v. Mitchell, the Supreme Court was tasked with reviewing the constitutionality of the provision. Justice Hugo Black wrote that Congress could only regulate the minimum voting age in the federal elections, but had no constitutional rights over state and local elections.
Under this verdict, 18 to 20-year-olds would be eligible to vote for president and vice president, but not for state officials up for election at the same time. Dissatisfaction with this situation built support among many states for a constitutional amendment that would set a uniform national voting age of 18 in all elections.
On March 10, 1971, the Senate voted unanimously in favor of the proposed amendment. On March 23, the 26th Amendment went to the states for ratification after an overwhelming House vote.
In just over 2 months, the necessary 3/4 of state legislatures ratified the 26th Amendment. This is the fastest an amendment has passed in U.S. history.
President Nixon signed it into law in July of that year. At a White House ceremony, Nixon declared, "The reason I believe that your generation, the 11 million new voters, will do so much for America at home is that you infuse into this nation some idealism, some courage, some stamina, some high moral purpose that this country always needs."
Old enough to fight, old enough to vote. We won.
If you're looking for something and it seems so far away, you can get it if you try.